So now you have power that you're leveraging. This is why you give me the listing agreement, because before you even give it to me, I brought a buyer to your table. That gives you a lot of leverage. So here's one way I've found the reason why this came about is Sharon and Jen and myself and Steve, we were talking about how can we bridge the gap between realtors and investors. And for so many years, and probably to this very day, there's some sort of disconnect where investors hate realtors and they suck, and realtors say investors are snakes and they're just trying to steal homes and whatever. And maybe that's you guys and maybe it's not for me to judge. But there's a lot more money for all of us to make if we're actually working hand in hand, lockstep, versus like penny, oh, you don't want to list it because they're just going to go after their commit or whatever the nonsense is. I've done a very good job about being able to provide value to my realtor partners. And in return, they actually provide a massive amount of value to me. And that's the point here, is there's an actual way that both sides, and especially agents, because predominantly that's what we're talking to, can actually build not only just a great stream of income, but ultimately like the wealth that we're all desiring. And I'll just ask you guys a question. Did you guys become real estate agents and or investors so you could just be the best listing agent or buyer's agent ever? Is that why you're like, that's my goal? No, my assumption, forgive me if I'm wrong, is you probably want to have 5,000 rental properties at the end of this thing. Would that be somewhat correct of why you got into this? Tell me if I'm wrong. That's fine. Most people, right, that's wealth. Wouldn't we all agree? Like most people are like, well, I want wealth. Well, that typically lands in the real estate positioning. So what I've been able to do is create a brand, a company, and a model that connects realtors and investors. And ultimately what you'll find, I believe you guys should also be investors. I don't believe it should be mutual. It should be you have the opportunity to be both. So ultimately that's what I'll find. So one thing I think is a great way for all realtors, and this isn't necessarily for me, right? So I'm going to talk into, you guys should befriend investors. And here's why. So there's what we call kind of a first look investment property. So the bringing properties to investors prior to listing them. How many of you guys have had a listing appointment and you're like, fuck, this home needs 20 grand to get it to where they want to sell it? Has that ever happened? Okay. So guess who would be able to spend the 20 grand that most likely that homeowner doesn't have? Is me, the investor, or your investor, whoever you're connecting with, right? So prior to even going on that appointment, here's what I would suggest. One way to do that is you call me and say, Justin, and I don't want to use me because I'm not going to be able to be the investor for all of you, but you call said investor and you say, okay, Justin, what can you offer on this property? Within 10 to 15 minutes, I can legitimately put an offer in your inbox, me signing it in your inbox of where I would need to be, based around everything I can tell you about the area. You want to work with someone who understands Phoenix, right? I've been here now flipping since 2007. I know the markets, the submarkets, like down to streets. So I'll get really close on my number. Doesn't mean that person will accept the offer. But what does it do for you, the agent? Well, you're going for a listing agreement, right? So now you have power that you're leveraging. This is why you give me the listing agreement, because before you even give it to me, I brought a buyer to your table. That gives you a lot of leverage. And quite frankly, best case scenario as I put here, we buy the deal. You get two ends on that, right? You get representing me and putting the list. Now maybe there's not enough room for that. You at least get one end and you don't have to list it. I work with agents to figure out a way for that 3% to potentially become, there's been agents that make more than me on a deal because they just know all the parties and they know how to make the deal work. And that's okay by me, by the way. And if any investor tells you otherwise, don't call me. Just don't work with them. Worst case scenario, you get the listing, right? That's the worst case scenario is they're like, you know what? You're the real deal. You're a very good listing agent. Prior to even getting the listing, you brought me a buy. And so the other way to do this is give me a chance to buy it rather than list it. So I work with a handful of realtors right now that know that I'm good to buy a property. So they will continually say, hey, I'm about to go list 123 Main Street. Justin, what would you give me for that? Because ideally we can just get the deal done. They don't have to go through the whole thing. Some agents want to have a name, so they say, can we at least list it for 24 hours even though it's accepted by the seller? I'll say fine, all of that kind of stuff, right? And so leveraging that and just giving me first look gives you guys 2 or 3 different models that you can be a rock star, right? And so that's a very important point to say, how many of those do you get a year? And I don't know, this is where I'll ask for your guys' feedback. How many listings do you guys get that you're kind of like, damn, this is gonna, like, I don't know if I'll be able to list this deal. So how easy would it be for, let's just say 1 a quarter. Let's make it for a year, okay? Let's lowball it because I know it happens more than that. For you to just send that to me and say, hey, dude, what would you pay for this? I know I'm not going to be able to get this thing listed, and let's see if there's a number that the seller is willing to accept. Telling me you're not going to get the listing number, so you need to be built into my number. Fine by me. So I have a lot of connections with like contractors that they don't have to pay themselves the extra 10% that I'm paying them to do my jobs. So they'll say, hey, I'll do it. You know, who's your hard money lender? I literally will say, here's Noah. Now that's 10% margin that they're keeping because it's built into the job. I can't do that. I have to pay them the 10%, right? So I have those people. And I think, and again, this isn't on the slide, I could go 2 days. So forgive me, I could do this for 2 days with you guys. Your agent database has those buyers on it already that you don't even need to list it. I don't know if you guys have a database of agents, but you should if you don't. And you should be sending that deal to them in a very similar manner, which would be called wholesaling. Hey, I have a pocket listing. Would you be able to find a buyer, or are you a buyer for this listing? Just get intrigue. See if people are, yeah, hey, I have someone looking in that area. Let's talk further. And then you open that gate. And that's to your own agent database. But I personally have an investor database that are built up of agents, investors, contractors, builders that a lot of times aren't scared of that stuff. Every investor you're going to talk to is going to say, I want deals 200 and under, 300 and under, 400. I mean, that's everybody, right? And do you guys know why? Why does that make sense? Buyer pool. So who can do the buyer pool? Because you have multiple exit strategies now as an investor. So if I flip that and it doesn't turn, that price point, I can make it a rental. So that's why investors stick to that. So just so you know why they do it, is because now they have 2 models. If I can, get a $300,000 property, it doesn't turn, I rent it, and I'm not terribly in the red. So first look, this has been massive. I mean, we'll do a deal a month from agents who are just sending over, hey, what would you pay for this? And I say, here's my contract, that's the number, and it gets locked up with that, right? And they typically saying, hey, I'm not built into anything, so you need to pay me. Fine, just tell me, right? I'm happy to make that happen. Just don't, at the end of this, saying, oh, well, there's no commission in it for me. Well, I built my numbers around that. Does that make sense to you guys? So the more open, honest, upfront, the more you're able to kind of just call it how it is and not paint some pretty picture of what the deal looks like, the more that investor is just going to be straightforward with you guys. Or should be. I mean, if they're not, then maybe not the right investor, but they should be.